Hey guys, welcome to CraterMania. I'm your host, the man they call Crater, and I'd like to welcome you all back to the 500 Movies in 2025 series. And this is part three of the Halloween Hoedown, where we are celebrating all movies Halloween themed for the entire month of October. If you've watched the last two episodes of the Halloween Hoedown, then you know that Halloween is an absolute special time for me. Uh, Probably my most favorite time of the entire year. But if you know me, you know that I celebrate Halloween every single day of the year. But it's just an even more special time when it gets around the actual Halloween season. Just I got the spirit of Halloween running all throughout me during this time, and just watching all these movies, talking about them with you guys, just brings so much joy to me, and just brings that inner child out of me when I'm talking about a lot of these movies. Um, so I guess I want to just go ahead and jump right into this. Um, so these five movies I'm going to be talking about tonight. So three of them um, are actually from the year 1995, and so that's been 30 years. So they're all three of those will be celebrating their 30th anniversary this year, and that is just insane to me, and it's making me feel old. I'm not gonna lie, because like it doesn't seem like it's been 30 years since a lot of these movies that came out in 1995. I can still remember where I was and how I felt when I was watching, so many movies from that year. But we'll definitely get into that more when we get to those movies tonight. Um, so for this first movie, like I said, I just want to jump right into this because it is Sunday, folks. I do have work tomorrow, so I want to try to just get through this as quickly as I can. But just first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone who's checking this out, taking the time out of their own lives just to listen to me ramble on about some movies that are special to me and were special to me in my childhood. Um, but yeah, like I said, so this is for this episode. This will be movies number 359 through 363 of the 500 movies in 2025, and for this first movie, this is an extremely special film to me. I can remember when I discovered this film. It was 3 years after the movie was released, and I'll get into that in a little bit later on in this review. How how I came to know about this film, but I I have been a diehard fan of just all things that with that gothic aesthetic, and all things that are like dark fantasy related, and just of course, just the ultimate celebration of all things spooky, around Halloween. Um, and this movie is without a doubt one of my all-time favorite movies, and that is The Crow from 1994. And I can honestly say that The Crow is more than just a movie to me. It's just a a yearly ritual when it comes around the time of Halloween. And every year, you know, um, my thoughts, around this time of year, my thoughts kind of, inevitably drift to this masterpiece. And, as I rewatch it, I'm reminded why it holds, such a special, place in my heart. And, this film, it's just, it's a dark and mesmerizing ballet of just vengeance, shrouded in this kind of perpetual night. It's really a perfect companion, to the Halloween season. And, it's all thanks, just to, it's captivating story. It's unforgettable lead and just that kind of sheer, unadulterated, atmosphere that it conjures. Um, you know, at its core, The Crow is like this supernatural superhero film. But honestly, if to label it as such as that kind of feels almost reductive. Um, This was directed by Alex Proyas, I think is how you say his name, and it was written by David Shaw and John Shirley. But the movie, is an adaptation of James O'Barr's, 1989 comic book series, and the story centers on Eric Draven, who is portrayed with this haunting intensity by Brandon Lee, in his final performance on film. Um, because his career was just tragically cut short during the making of this film, and we'll get into that a little bit later on as well. But Eric, who he is this charismatic rock musician, and he's brutally murdered, alongside his fiancee Shelley Webster, by this sadistic gang that barged into their apartment one night. Um, the night before Halloween, to be exact. And their crime is just kind of fueled by this greed and a disregard for the lives of just ordinary people. And that stems from their attempt to just these to protest these kind of forced evictions that was orchestrated by this ruthless crime boss, Top Dollar. Um, so, like I said, the film opens up on Devil's Night, October 30th, and the night before Halloween. And just a night of just escalating, urban chaos and just violence, in this kind of dilapidated and crime-ridden Detroit. And so the setting, immediately immerses the audience, in this world that just kind of feels perpetually, on the brink of darkness, which is a perfect prelude to just the horrors that unfold throughout the film. And Eric and Shelley's tragic demise is just kind of depicted with, a this visceral, heart wrenching brutality, and emphasizing just the injustice and the sheer senselessness of their end. And Shelley, though critically wounded, endures this horrific 30 hours of suffering, before succumbing to her injuries. Which is a detail that fuels Eric's rage, and his quest for closure, once he comes back into the world of the living. Um, and the legend of the crow is the crow itself, not the title, but just the crow itself in the movie, is central, to the film's supernatural premise. Um, this almost like mystical bird, acts as a guide for souls. And in tragic circumstances, like Eric's, it possesses this power to resurrect, this restless spirit, and granting them this unnatural life to to seek vengeance and just to bring about a sense of justice, or perhaps just pure unadulterated retribution. So a year after Eric's death, he's indeed resurrected, by this crow. Um, and he returns to this ravaged apartment, just a ghostly figure really himself, and is just plagued by um these kind of vivid flashbacks of just these horrific events, that led to his and Shelley's deaths. Um, and, just with the revelation of his resurrection comes the discovery of this extraordinary ability that his wounds heal almost instantaneously. So, this kind of newfound immortality, powered by the crow, allows Eric to transform into this kind of vengeful spirit. So he kind of, he puts on these, these the black and white, face paint, and just just which is a visual that has just become legendary now. And he just puts on these all black clothes and just different, a very gothic looking aesthetic to him. One of the coolest looks, honestly, for like a vigilante that on film, in my opinion. um, and so Eric sets out on this kind of path of retribution, just guided by his this silent, watchful crow. And his targets are the perpetrators of his and Shelley's murder, and that's 1010, Fun Boy, and T Bird and Skank, and they're all these enforcers that for the domineering top dollar. So the film just masterfully chronicles Eric's dismantling of the gang. Each encounter is very stylized, almost kind of this operatic display of just violence and poetic justice. So he confronts Tintin first, and that culminates in this kind of brutal demise. And he takes his trench coat and stuff after that, and he recovers Shelley's engagement ring from this pawn shop ran by a guy named Gideon, that was visited frequently by Tintin. And that engagement ring was just the symbol of Eric and Shelley's lost love. And he just, after he finds the ring, he obliterates the shop, leaving a message for top dollar. um, Eric, he even confronts, Fun Boy, this, kind of drug addled member of the gang, um, and Sarah, which was Eric and Shelley's friend. Her mother, Darla, is with Fun Boy, and, she's just, an addict herself. And, so, this, when he confronts Fun Boy, he kind of administers this fatal overdose, and he's simultaneously urging Darla towards sobriety, for her daughter Sarah's own sake. Um, so, and Sarah, like I said, she's this young girl that Eric and Shelley cared for, and she becomes this kind of crucial, emotional anchor throughout the film. Also serves as the narrator for the film, and just her vulnerability, just really highlights what Eric is fighting for. Um, and just the gritty reality of just law enforcement, represented here by Sergeant Albrecht, who's played by Ernie Hudson. It's just he's this compassionate detective who witnessed Shelley's final moments, and he stayed with her the entire time through those grueling 30 hours that she was in pain. um, so Albrecht, he becomes aware of Eric's, vengeful presence, and just through this kind of supernatural connection, facilitated by Eric, he experiences that, that agonizing pain that, that Shelley endured. So this kind of shared, suffering just creates this unique bond between Albrecht and Eric. Um, but the climax, just builds with, top dollars plan to set the city, ablaze on Devil's Night, and Eric infiltrates this, a gathering, clashing with Skank and his associates in this, kind of chaotic shootout. Um, the film doesn't shy away from its noir sensibilities, with Albrecht even, aiding Eric's escape from the police. Um, and top dollar, and his incestuous lover and half sister Micah, and also his formidable right hand man Grange, played by Tony Todd, by the way. They all become aware, of the Crow's significance, and Eric's invincibility. So the final act is this kind of desperate, high stakes confrontation. Um, Grange abducts Sarah, bringing her to this abandoned church where, top dollar has plans to execute his vision for the city, and, just setting everything on fire. So Eric is, alerted by the Crow in this, and he races to, Sarah's rescue. But Grange, ends up shooting and wounding the Crow. And this renders Eric vulnerable at this point. So then Albrecht arrives, and he dispatches Grange, while Micah, seeking the Crow's power, meets this gruesome end by the Crow, by pecks her face to death, and then she falls down this huge tower in the church, uh, killing her ultimately. Um, but the final duel, between Eric and Top Dollar on the church roof is just this brutal, desperate struggle. In this kind of final act of, retribution, Eric, he transfers Shelley's immense pain onto Top Dollar, leading to this, spectacular and just grisly death where he falls off the top of the church onto like this gargoyle with the like spiky horns or whatever, and it impales him. So beyond this, the film concludes, with Sarah and Albrecht recovering, and a wounded Eric just finding peace at Shelley's grave, and their spirits are finally reunited, and just allowing his body to return to eternal rest. Um, and as I said, Alex Proyas, who's the visionary director behind The Crow, he's known for his distinctive just visual style, that kind of often leans into dark and gothic and the atmospheric aesthetics. Um, before The Crow, he, had gained recognition um, for, a lot of just visually stunning and, thematically complex, sci-fi films. And then just 4 years after The Crow, he did a movie called Dark City, which, it just kind of shares this similar, noir infused like urban landscape and dread. So that's and that's a really good film just as well. His work is really characterized by just this insane attention to detail and in set design and cinematography and special effects, and just he really created these worlds that are just both hauntingly beautiful and also deeply unsettling. And he just he has this gift for translating these kind of grand and often abstract concepts into like tangible, immersive cinematic experiences. Um, and The Crow's legacy is is definitely like all over the place. It's very profound. Just the film's impact extends far beyond its critical reception and box office success, which are still impressive given the its challenging production. Um, you know, Firstly, Brandon Lee's performance and tragic death are just know inextricably linked to the film's legend. Uh, Brandon Lee poured his heart and soul into the role of Eric Draven, just delivering this performance that was both raw and deeply felt. And just watching this movie time after time after time, I can't help but just feeling something and getting emotional when watching this film, just knowing that this was his very last film and he died making this film. And just knowing how much he put into that character is it just it gives me a lot of admiration for that, and I have a lot of respect for Brandon Lee, what he did, with this film and with that character. Um, and his untimely death just during the filming, just it sent shockwaves through Hollywood, and just it cemented his status as this tragic, cinematic icon. Um, and with the film's completion, through script rewrites and use of stunt doubles and just some groundbreaking effects for its time, it is really a testament, just to the dedication of the cast and crew. And it's just this very powerful tribute to to Brandon Lee's unfinished work. Um, and the film's dedication to Brandon Lee and his fiance Eliza um, just really serves as a very somber reminder, just of the human cost of filmmaking and just that immense talent that was lost. Um, you know, Secondly, though, the film's aesthetic and tone have had a lasting influence. The Crow popularized a specific brand of just gothic urban fantasy, which is characterized by these, these perpetually rain slick streets and stark black and white makeup and leather attire, and just, this soundtrack that was heavy on alternative and industrial rock with bands like The Cure and Nine Inch Nails, and just, this whole aesthetic really resonated deeply, with a generation, and just influenced, several films that followed, and music videos, and even fashion. you know so the film's kind of neo-noir sensibility, just combined with, its supernatural elements, really created this unique and enduring, visual language. Um, and thirdly, its themes of loss and grief and vengeance just struck a chord with a ton of audiences. The Crow is not just an action film or a film, based off of a comic book. Um, it's just this profound exploration of pain and, the desire for, for justice, and just in the face of unimaginable loss. And every time I watch this film, from the get go, from the very beginning, just, the through the visuals of the flashback sequences and the things that's, in Eric's mind, where he's, just watching these events happen over and over in his mind, of what happened to him, what happened to his girlfriend Shelly, is just deeply, deeply heartbreaking. And I can't help but get emotional every time I watch this film. It's such a dark and beautiful story. Um, and just Eric Draven's journey, it's fueled by love, and it's driven by rage. And it's just a very cathartic, although dark, story for those who have just experienced, profound grief in their own lives. Um, and just, the film's ability to kind of weave these, emotional threads into its, supernatural framework is just a major reason for this film's enduring appeal. But furthermore, The Crow is an absolute cult classic. you know it has this unconventional, narrative about it, and these dark themes, just a unique style. Excuse me. This unique style that just have fostered, a dedicated fan base that just continues, to celebrate, the film decades later. And its success has just paved the way for sequels and a television series and a reboot, and there's even been a couple video games. But none of those have managed to capture, the magic and just that emotional resonance of the original film. And I just think that further solidifies its status as a one of a kind, cinematic achievement. Um, but finally, the film's enduring connection to Halloween culture is undeniable. It's dark, gothic atmosphere. It's themes of death and resurrection. It's general, like, spookiness really makes it a perfect watch, for the season. And Devil's Night, which is a fictional night of this escalating crime and destruction, that precedes Halloween in the film, is, directly referenced, and it creates this kind of thematic link that makes The Crow, an ideal film for October viewing and the Halloween season. um but as I mentioned earlier, um I discovered this film back in 1997, which was 3 years after the movie was released. And the reason I discovered this movie was because I have been an avid professional wrestling fan since the very early 1990s. And in the year of 1997, this was right in the heart of the Monday Night Wars. And over on WCW, the whole NWO storyline was in full force at this time. And this is when my favorite wrestler of all time, Sting, went through this just incredible transformation from being this colorful, like loud, um, just this huge over the top personality in wrestling to this dark Avenger. And and his whole look was transformed into Eric Draven, basically. So he had taken this new look, which he's often referred to as Crow Sting. So yeah, the face paint, the all black, um, just the trench coat. He was just like this new dark Avenger for professional wrestling to take on the NWO. So I remember, I think it was my brother and my sister-in-law told me that, like, oh, he got that look from the Crow. And I was like, what's the Crow? And I remember them telling me about it. And when I went to the video store to rent the Crow on VHS, um, it just changed my life really in a lot of ways. Um, and just it made me appreciate the character that Sting was portraying over on WCW even more. Um, so, just following the film's release and this, it's kind of burgeoning cult status, said Sting had adopted that new look, and just that character was just heavily inspired by Eric Draven. So, this kind of visual homage by Sting just further, amplified awareness of the Crow, and it really solidified its, aesthetic influence beyond just the realm of cinema. It brought that imagery of the Crow to a new audience, and it worked. It demonstrated just that powerful cultural reach of Brandon Lee's iconic character. It helped me find out about the Crow. So definitely, like, so thanks to WCW and Scott Hall, of all people, who's the one that suggested that idea to WCW to Sting to portray that. And man, that really changed Sting's career forever. But yeah, I had to mention that because that was like an important part of my childhood, and how I discovered The Crow, and it ended up being one of my favorite movies of all time. Um, but I did want to touch a little bit more on Brandon Lee's death. So just the tragic circumstances surrounding Brandon Lee's death are just profoundly heartbreaking. You know, and it's kind of part of the whole making of the Crow's story. So on March 31st, 1993, while filming this scene in Wilmington, North Carolina, um, Brandon Lee was fatally wounded. The scene involved his character Eric Draven. Just it's the scene with Fun Boy and Darla and all that. And so the actor Michael Massey, who played Fun Boy, he fires this prop gun at Brandon Lee. And um the tragedy stemmed from this kind of catastrophic failure and these safety protocols involving the prop gun. Um, so during the filming of an earlier scene, the same gun was shown in close up. Instead of using these standard dummy cartridges, which have bullets, but no powder. The prop crew, under these kind of time and budget constraints, so they say, created their own by pulling the bullets from live rounds, removing the powder, but leaving the primer intact. So this resulted in this bullet becoming lodged in the barrel of the gun. And crucially, in the fatal scene, the gun was loaded with blank rounds, which have powder and primer but no bullet. However, due to the previous lodged bullet, um, the barrel was not inspected for obstructions. And when the blank rounds were fired, just the force of the powder that powder charge, just propelled the lodge bullet from the barrel. Um, just and it struck Brandon Lee, in the abdomen from like a distance of like 12 to 15 feet or something. So, yeah, Brandon Lee's death just left the production in a state of shock and just uncertainty. And, he had completed most of his scenes already, um, with, just only a few days of filming remaining as well. And, Paramount Pictures was initially set to, distribute the film. They ended up withdrawing, due to the controversy and just the that kind of perceived inappropriateness of releasing, a violent film following such a tragedy. Um, but Miramax, however, they stepped in and, investing in an additional $8 million to complete the production. So thank God for Miramax, and the remaining scenes were just a monumental undertaking for them, and just involving these kind of script rewrites and, the use of Brandon Lee's stunt double, and just, this kind of innovative digital face replacement technology for that time to kind of superimpose, Brandon Lee's face onto the stunt double. Um, so, the beginning of the film was also rewritten and remade using computer graphics that were derived from earlier footage of Brandon Lee. Um, and the original script also featured this character called the Skull Cowboy, who was, acted as this guide for Eric between worlds. And so those scenes with Michael Berryman, who was playing the Skull Cowboy, um, they were filmed, but ultimately they were just cut due to Brandon Lee's death. So James O'Barr, the creator of the comic, he later expressed that losing Brandon Lee felt like losing his fiance all over again. And this is, just a sentiment that just kind of underscores that deep, emotional impact of the tragedy on everyone involved. Um, but, in conclusion, The Crow is for me, one of the most quintessential Halloween films that there is. It transcends its genre, just offering this dark fairy tale, just drenched in atmosphere and, just fueled by grief and just delivered with this kind of artistic flair that just remains captivating to this day. Alex Proyas, he crafted this world that just feels both nightmarish and strangely beautiful. Like I said, just which is a perfect canvas, for just the tragic, vengeful spirit of Eric Draven. And, Brandon Lee's performance is nothing short of legendary here. Um, One of my all-time favorite performances in the movie, to be honest. And it's just a very powerful blend of, of vulnerability and just ferocity that just tragically marked his final bow. And just the film's gothic aesthetic, its powerful soundtrack and just that exploration, of loss and retribution just really resonates deeply with not only me but just so many fans of this movie, especially during this time of year. Um, and every element, from just the rain soaked streets of Detroit to, the iconic black and white face paint, it all contributes to this kind of immersive, experience that harks back to just the spirit of Halloween, a time when the veil between worlds is thin and, the darkness holds a certain alluring power to it. So that, that the tragic circumstances, of this movie's production, only add to the legend and the mystique of the film. Just kind of turn it into this, like I said, this cinematic legend that continues to haunt and inspire. For any fan of dark fantasy, or with gothic sensibilities, or simply just a well crafted, emotionally charged film, The Crow is an absolute masterpiece. It's an absolute must watch. Um, I definitely would put it on a list for people to watch. One of those films that they must watch before they die. Um, and especially just during this time of year, it's a master class in atmosphere, and just a powerful reminder of just that enduring power of love, and just that devastating force of vengeful justice. One of my all-time favorite movies. um, Absolutely got to see this if you've never seen The Crow. Absolutely love this movie. um, but as much as I love this movie, there are so many other movies out there that I loved as well. Maybe not as much as The Crow, but I definitely, with this next movie, I love this movie. And before this movie even existed, I loved the title character of this from the cartoons and the comics. And I, I'm a lifelong fan of the spooky season of Halloween, and I'm a card carrying member of the Casper the Friendly Ghost fan club. I feel compelled to sing the praises of this beloved 1995 film. For me, and I suspect for many others, who grew up in the 90s. Casper is just this very warm feeling, nostalgic embrace, just a perfectly crafted blend of Halloween spirit and heartfelt emotion, and also groundbreaking visual effects that even decades later holds up beautifully. Um, so, like I said, this is released in 1995, and Casper is just this film that dared to just reimagine the iconic, always friendly ghost for a new generation. And this was directed by Brad Silberling. This was his feature, directorial debut. A fact that seems almost unbelievable given the film's polish and ambition. And the screenplay was written by Sherry Stoner and Deanna Oliver. They took the familiar Casper character and just infused him with a kind of depth and complexity that was rarely seen in children's entertainment of that era. Um, so the film stars a young Christina Ricci, and I had one of the biggest crush when I was a kid on Christina Ricci, not just from Casper, but from the Addams Family movies, and just everything that she was a part of at that time. Even when she was even younger in the movie Mermaids, the movie with Cher and Winona Ryder. Um, I had such a huge crush on Christina Ricci because I believe we're around the same age. Like maybe I think she may be a little bit older than what I am, but anyway. So she plays Cat Harvey, who is this lonely teenager who moves into this kind of imposing Whipstaff Manor with her father, James Harvey, who's played by Bill Pullman. And Dr. Harvey is this paranormal therapist, who is hired to rid the mansion of its spectral inhabitants, ghosts, if you will. So Casper, who is voiced with this kind of gentle sincerity by Malachi Pearson, is the primary resident, just a ghost who longs for friendship. However, his presence is overshadowed by his obnoxious uncles, the ghostly trio, who's voiced by Joe Nipote and Joe Alasky and Brad Garrett, and they're far from friendly. So what truly sets Casper apart is just its ambitious, use of this computer generated imagery, CGI. So this this film just made history, as the first feature film to feature a fully CGI character in the lead role, and the results were astonishing for their time. Um, just the ghosts, from Casper's form to the more kind of boisterous and chaotic movements of his uncles were all rendered with this kind of believability that just really captivated audiences. Um, and I guess, and furthermore, Casper bravely steered away from that kind of purely, lighthearted renditions of the past. Embraced a kind of a darker, more emotional interpretation of the character, and it really gave Casper this kind of tragic backstory. So we discovered that Casper was once this boy named Casper McFadden, who had died of, I think it was pneumonia, at a very young age, when he was like 12 years old, and he became this ghost to kind of keep his, grieving father company. Um, and just this emotional core resonates deeply and elevates the film beyond this kind of simple ghost story. Um, but the story in the beginning unfolds as Kerrigan Crittenden, played by Kathy Moriarty, she's this greedy, heiress to that inherits Whipstaff Manor, but she finds herself more interested in this kind of rumored treasure that's hidden within the walls of the manor. So she and her lawyer named Dibbs, who's played by Eric Idle, and I love Eric Idle because I'm a huge Monty Python fan as well. But they're the villains of this story, and their pursuit of just wealth clashing with the Harveys' attempts to kind of coexist with these ghosts that they live with. And as Kerrigan and Dibbs, relentlessly try to exploit the manor and its ghosts. Casper, who's drawn to Kat's loneliness, begins to kind of form a genuine connection with her. Um, and the film masterfully weaves this together, these themes of like loneliness and friendship and loss and just that yearning for connection. And Kat, who is just struggling with her father's obsession with communicating with his deceased wife Amelia, she finds solace in Casper's company. So their friendship is really the heart of the movie here, and it's really a testament just to finding family in unexpected places. Um, and then you have, the magical Halloween party towards the end of the film, which is a pivotal scene. It becomes this kind of celebration, of this bond and just a showcase for, the film's kind of visual splendor with just that, the ghostly transformations and the just that heartwarming moments, that just all are happening within that scene. Um, but Casper was released on May 26th, 1995 by Universal Pictures. And while critics at that time were divided, with some praising its visual effects and emotional depth, and others were kind of finding it somewhat uneven. The film was a huge commercial success. It grossed, I think, 289 or 290 million or something like that worldwide against this $55 million budget that it had. It also spawned two direct to video prequels and this animated television series, and it just solidified Casper's place in pop culture, at that time. It was, I mean, Casper was already like very iconic for the cartoons, and the comics dating back, decades before the movie's release. But this really brought the attention back on the character in the 90s. And the director for Casper was Brad Silberling. And this marked his impressive feature film debut of directing. And Steven Spielberg, who was just kind of a keen observer of talent, noticed that Silberling's work, on the television series called Brooklyn Bridge, and just saw his potential for bringing Casper to life and on the big screen. Um, and Silberling, himself expressed an interest in a darker, more fantastical take on Casper, akin to like the Wizard of Oz, which was clearly influenced, the tone and the visual style of the film. So Alex Proyas, who was the director for The Crow, was initially attached to direct, but departed due to kind of creative differences. Just allowing Silberling to shape the film into the vision that we know today. And with J.J. Abrams also contributed this an uncredited rewrite that just kind of further owned the screenplay. So, and I only found that out recently. The thing about with J.J. Abrams, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. But the legacy of Casper, is just multifaceted and enduring. Um, and firstly, it's groundbreaking use of the CGI just kind of revolutionized how animated characters could be integrated into live action films. And Casper as that first fully CGI lead just paved the way for future technological advancements in filmmaking, just proving that complex digital characters could carry a story and evoke genuine emotion. And as much as I love practical effects, and I'm more on that side of when it comes to effects, special effects. I definitely understand like the use of CGI in these type of scenarios and how it works beautifully. The whole state of the art visual achievement, as it was often kind of lauded at the time, really just set a new benchmark for special effects in family films. But beyond all its technical achievements, Casper just has this kind of significant, cultural impact, just really rooted in its emotional resonance. And the film just kind of dared to explore darker themes within this family friendly context, particularly Casper's tragic backstory and this untimely death. um, this really provided a depth that resonated with audiences, offering this more kind of nuanced portrayal of loss and the afterlife. And just the film's exploration of loneliness and just the search for belonging, particularly through the parallel journeys of Kat and Casper, it really struck a chord with many viewers, making the characters more relatable and and their friendship just kind of very powerful to the story here. And for those of us who adore Halloween movies, Casper occupies a special place in my heart and many others out there, I know for sure. While it's not a horror film, it perfectly just captures that kind of spookiness of the season, just with ghosts and the haunted mansion setting, and just and just the Halloween party at the end of the film. It all contributes to this very festive, you know spooky spirit of Halloween atmosphere. Um, it's a film that can be watched, year round, but it feels particularly fitting, for this time of year. It's a gateway film, I think, for many into the kind of broader world of Halloween cinema. It just introduces that fun and wonder of the supernatural without kind of being overly frightening or whatever. But the film's ability just to balance humor and heart and spectacle is just a testament to its lasting appeal. um the chemistry between Christina Ricci and Bill Pullman as the Harvey father-daughter duo is just is is amazing here. Just their individual journeys are compelling. Yeah, it is just that central friendship though between Kat and Casper that truly anchors the film though. Just their connection with one another is kind of born out of this shared loneliness and just a desire for understanding is just that emotional core that really continues to draw audiences back time after time after time again and again. Um, but furthermore, Casper introduced just a generation to the character of Casper the Friendly Ghost with just kind of this fresh, updated sensibility. While, respecting the character's kindness, the film gave him a more complex past and just a more, defined personality. And it made him, more than just a ghostly presence. Just the interpretation of the ghostly trio and Stretch and Stinky and Fatso, you know, while as these kind of chaotic, often bumbling and but ultimately and mostly well-meaning uncles, really also added this layer, of just comedic, dynamic that just remains entertaining time after time. Um, but I guess in conclusion, Casper is more than just a ghost story film for families, for kids. Um, it's it's this beautifully crafted film that just blends, that groundbreaking visual effects with just kind of a deeply affecting story. Um, and as a devoted fan of both, the film and, or really more than just, the film and the comic and the cartoon and just the spirit of Halloween in general, I can attest to its enduring, charm. It's a movie that just kind of understands, that bittersweet nature of life and loss and just, celebrates the power of friendship. And it just does it with all this kind of this touch of this ghostly magic. Um, the technical achievements, again, like I said, they're undeniable. But it's the heart of the film, you know, embodied by this lonely ghost and this girl who befriends him, that just truly makes Casper, a timeless classic, and just a cherished part of my Halloween viewing tradition. Um, it's a friendly haunting that never fails to leave me with a smile, I guess you could say. But yeah, like I said, I'm a huge, huge Casper fan, not just of this movie, but the character in general. Both me and my wife are. We have several pieces of merchandise, which I should have pulled out here to show some of that stuff to you guys. But maybe I'll do a separate video in the future or something on that stuff. But definitely, if you've never seen Casper, um, it's one that you definitely need to check out. But for this next movie, this is a movie that I had never seen before. It always had been on my radar for years. And I knew that Linnea Quigley, who is my favorite scream queen of all time, I think she's the GOAT when it comes to scream queens. I knew that she was in it. Wasn't sure how big of a role she had in this movie, but I finally decided to sit down and watch this movie as a part of my 500 movies in 2025 and part of the Halloween Hoedown. And well, I don't have a whole lot to say about this movie, so I think I'm going to keep this one kind of short. But as a devoted fan and lover of all things Halloween film, I'm always on the hunt for those kind of these hidden gems, or delightfully campy B movies that just kind of capture the spirit, of the season. So when I stumbled upon this movie, like I didn't really stumble upon it. Like I said, I've known about this movie for years, but like I finally just decided to watch this movie, which is from 1995, also celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, uh, just like Casper. Um, and it was a direct to video release, and this movie is called Jacko. And this is a film, that promises, a vengeful, pumpkin-headed scarecrow and this Halloween setting. So my interest was piqued for sure. I was like, Linnea Quigley's in it. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely gonna watch this. So, like I said, this was my first time watch of Jacko, and it certainly left, it definitely left an impression, though perhaps not entirely the one intended. Um, but Jacko was directed by Steve Latshaw, and it was executive produced by Fred Olen Ray, which you may know from movies like Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, which also starred Linnea Quigley. Oh, and Brink Stevens. Brink Stevens, who is also in Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, is also in this as well, but a very, very small role when it comes to, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. But like, anyway, it plunges us into this movie plunges us into this kind of idyllic town of Oakmore Crossing, just as the Halloween season is descending, and the story centers around the Kelly family, David, Linda, and their son Sean. And their kind of suburban existence is just disrupted by the arrival of Vivian Machen, who is this woman with these kind of deep ancestral ties to Oakmore Crossing, much like the Kellys themselves. So Vivian, reveals this dark family history, explaining that one of the Kelly ancestors was responsible for hanging Walter Machen, who was a man that was accused of being a warlock. And in retaliation, Machen is said to have conjured this terrifying pumpkin head scarecrow, aptly named Jacko, from the depths of hell to seek revenge on the Kelly lineage. So this monstrous creation was supposedly buried by the ancestor, but as is often the case in horror, this a group of meddling teenagers, inadvertently unearths Jacko and just unleashing him upon the town and setting the stage for this kind of uh bloody rampage. So Steve Latshaw, who's the director of Jacko, is just a figure that's kind of well acquainted with the world of low budget genre filmmaking, and Jacko just represents his third collaboration with executive producer Fred Olen Ray, following Dark Universe from 1993 and Biohazard: The Alien Force from 1994. So this kind of consistent working relationship just suggests a certain synergy in their approach to filmmaking, which is often characterized by utilizing familiar casts and crews to just maximize the output within these tight budgets. But Latshaw's filmography leans heavily into that kind of sci-fi and horror genres that were just staples of the direct-to-video market during the 1990s. Um, but the legacy of Jacko is primarily that of a cult curiosity within the direct-to-video horror scene, of the mid '90s. It features this cast that would be recognizable to fans of low-budget horror, including Linnea Quigley, in this significant role. Um, and I think her name was like Carolyn or something in the movie. But the film also kind of boasts some notable, although posthumous cameo appearances from legendary actors like John Carradine and Cameron Mitchell, and it really just kind of adds this touch of that classic Hollywood to its proceedings. Um, but the film's production lineage is also worth noting. The consistent presence of Latshaw and Fred Olen Ray and actor Patrick Moran, who not only played Jacko but also had writing credits on all three of their shared projects. It just highlights that kind of tight knit nature of certain segments of the independent film industry. And supporting actors such as Brink Stevens, also, reappeared across multiple projects, further cementing these kind of recurring, creative teams. So Latshaw's own son, Ryan Latshaw, who's also featured in all three of these films, plays Sean in this movie. Um, but however, Jacko's critical reception was far from stellar. As mentioned, one reviewer famously and colorfully described the film as a shit pickle. And while J.R. Taylor of Entertainment Weekly, offered a more measured B grade, labeling it as an entertaining disaster, the consensus leads towards negative. And that's as nice as I can be about it. So, what I mean? Like the most frequent criticism and the one that is difficult to ignore upon viewing. And this is something that I noticed straight away from the get-go, is that perceived similarity to the 1989 horror film Pumpkinhead. So, critics like J.R. Taylor and John Moore have, pointed out that that clear influence, with them going so far as to call Jacko, this low budget variation, on the much superior original. So, despite these criticisms, though, they do acknowledge that an ambition within Jacko, and suggesting that the film attempts to just explore these themes of political polarization and just the culture war of the 1990s, though through this kind of depiction of conservative suburbanites. Um, However, he ultimately, concludes that in execution, the film is pretty defensible, just lacking, suspense and suffering from pretty bad acting, and just failing to be neither particularly scary nor particularly well made. Um, and this whole assessment, encapsulates just the common understanding of Jacko, which is a film with some interesting concepts and just a somewhat dedicated cult following, but ultimately just hobbled by its execution and overshadowed by its more successful predecessor in Pumpkinhead. Um, but like I said, I was going to keep this short. So in conclusion, my first viewing of Jacko was an experience, befitting to its kind of direct to video origins, and its, the polarizing reviews, which I don't really like pay much attention when it comes to other people's reviews on movies. I like to just, watch stuff and then make my own opinion on it. But in this scenario with this movie, I kind of have to agree with some of those critics. Just as a horror fan who cherishes Halloween themed, movies, and just I found elements to appreciate in the very premise and the creature design here in this film. However, the film's, kind of earnest attempt at horror, kind of falters, often veering into this kind of unintentional comedy just due to the pacing issues, the acting choices, and just that, that general lack of, genuine terror. While it may not reach the heights of, atmospheric dread or, iconic monster status, Jacko definitely provides a certain nostalgic charm, for those who enjoy digging into like the less, polished corners of the horror genre. It's an entertaining disaster, I guess you could call it, as one reviewer put that in that sense, which is, a film that's more likely to be remembered for, its ambition and its flaws, than for any kind of truly, terrifying scares or anything. Um, it certainly adds, another peculiar pumpkin, I guess, to the vast patch of Halloween horror cinema, if I can say, anything truly positive about it. But yeah, that's Jacko. I mean, you guys can definitely check out Jacko if you want and see what you think about it. Maybe you might like it a lot more than what I did. Um, it's on the Roku channel for free, if you want to watch it at your own leisure. But yeah, so just definitely give it a shot. I would say just watch it, kind of form your own opinion on it. That's the way I feel about any movie, though. Um, but this next movie, and I 100% consider this a movie, um, even though it's a part of a TV series, and it was the initial, like, in the inaugural episode of this series. It's feature length, and so in that sense, I consider this a movie. And I've been a lifelong fan since the early '90s of R.L. Stein's Goosebumps. I love the books. I have a ton of Goosebumps memorabilia around here. I have a ton of the books. Um, I'm someone who just practically lives and breathes Halloween all year long, and especially during this time of year, the haunted mask, the first the inaugural, I cannot say that word, so I'm just gonna say the first ever episode uh, of Goosebumps. Like I said, it was a feature length film, and it just kind of holds this very special place in my Goosebumps filled heart. So like I said, this feature length episode, which kicked off the television series, it isn't just a nostalgic trip down memory lane. It's just a masterclass in building, genuine dread and exploring, relatable um, childhood anxieties through this kind of spooky, yet ultimately empowering lens. It perfectly captures just the essence of what made Goosebumps a phenomenon, and just its enduring legacy is just a testament to its brilliant execution. Um, the Haunted Mask, just which is that that first ever episode of the Goosebumps television series, just stands as a monument to R.L. Stein's ability to translate that the page turning terror of his books to the screen. And this was based on the 11th book in the original Goosebumps book series. This 1995 television adaptation just dives headfirst into the anxieties of Carly Beth Caldwell, a character that many of us, myself included, saw ourselves in. Carly Beth is the quintessential shy and easily frightened child, just a prime target for the cruel taunts of her classmates and her bullies, Chuck Green and Steve Boswell. So just their relentless bullying of her, um, culminates on this Halloween night when with this kind of particularly nasty prank. They trick her into eating this sandwich at school laced with a worm. And this kind of humiliation sparks just this burning desire within Carly Beth for revenge, and just a yearning to finally flip the script and become the one who instills the fear into them. Um, so her quest for this kind of terrifying disguise leads her to this very eccentric mask shop in town. And this isn't just any novelty store. This is a place that is just brimming with these unsettling creations and just hinting at a more darker magic, that's lurking within. And the shop's owner, who is this kind of cryptic figure, warns against the more hideous mask, but Carly Beth, just fueled by her anger and desperation, just she can't resist. She ultimately, makes off with a mask that's so gruesome and so profoundly disturbing, that it just immediately captivates her. And just that initial thrill of scaring her younger brother, with this new terrifying persona is short lived. Um, the mask with its kind of insidious power just proves stubbornly difficult to remove, to take off, and really kind of hints at this sinister connection that just goes far beyond, fabric and latex. So just the true horror starts to unfold, as Carly Beth, still wearing the mask, ventures out to confront her tormentors, her bullies from school, um, Chuck and Steve. So the mask's influence kind of warps her personality and transforms her from this kind of timid child into this kind of marauding force of Halloween mischief. Um, she reveals in just the fear that she now instills, and her actions becoming kind of increasingly aggressive and destructive, and just the iconic scene where she buries this plaster mold of her own head that her mother had created for her is just a desperate attempt to preserve her true self while embracing her monstrous alter ego. And it's just a visual representation of that internal struggle that she faces. So this kind of act, just meant to be this kind of symbolic shredding, of her old life, becomes this pivotal moment, where she realizes the mask is no longer a costume. It has begun to just to take over her very being, which is a very terrifying, physical manifestation of her desire to escape her own vulnerability. Um, that's pretty deep for a kid story, right? So The story just kind of expertly, ratchets up this tension, as Carly Beth, discovers this horrifying truth that the mask is literally a real face. It's this parasitic entity that just feeds on her fear and anger. And the shop's owner, has this kind of cryptic pronouncement that only a symbol of love can sever that connection that adds this another layer of desperation to her plot. um and then the climax of this, set against this kind of backdrop of a cemetery and pursued by this army of these animated masks, is just this very chaotic, adrenaline fueled chase. So her frantic attempt to just retrieve the mold of her head, her true self, and use it to just to break free from the haunted mask spectral grip, is just a very powerful visualization of her, her desperate fight for identity. Um, just when you think that the ordeal is over, the episode delivers its final, chilling twist that her younger brother, donning the very same haunted mask, leaving the audience with this unsettling understanding that the cycle of fear and transformation is far from broken. Um, and this is why I loved Goosebumps, because it would take these simple stories, kids like, scary stories, but infuse this very deep message behind them. Um, and that's why I love the books. That's why I love the TV series and all these different characters throughout the Goosebumps universe. Um, just the impact of the haunted mask, it extends far beyond its kind of initial broadcast numbers. So like, it premiered on October 27th, 1995. Um, which is almost exactly 30 years ago now, to this massive 7.9 million households in the US. And it became, YTV's highest rated episode in Canada. So its success was undeniable. The VHS release followed, which is what I have. And I still have my VHS copy of the Haunted Mask to this day. Um, it just, it quickly became this a bestseller. And by August of 1996, over 2.5 million units of that VHS had been sold. This was a commercial triumph, and it speaks volumes, about, this episode's resonance with audiences, and just particularly young viewers who were just captivated by its blend of scares, and relatable themes. Um, and more than just a commercial success, the haunted mask cemented its place in pop culture through this kind of thematic depth. At its core, the episode is just a powerful exploration of pure taunting, childhood cruelty, and just that overwhelming desire to fit in. And that's so relatable to a lot of kids, including myself at, at an age, during that age. I felt like there was a lot of times when I was growing up in school that I had a lot of trouble, fitting in, and I went through bullying and all that stuff. But so I think that's why, stories like this were so important to me, because I could definitely see a lot of relatability in them. But Carly Beth's transformation from this victim to, a tormentor herself, you know, uh, although, initially fueled by the mask's magic, highlights that dark side, of aggression, and just the negative consequences of suppressing one's true identity. Um, so the story, cleverly uses just the supernatural element to kind of externalize Carly Beth's internal struggles, just forcing her and the audience to confront the idea that, true strength comes, not from inflicting fear, but from, self-acceptance and love. And I can't remember the name of the company, but there was like this report I remember reading about that aptly put that Carly Beth must learn to love and accept herself. And that's very true within, reality as well. But this episode's lasting impact is also evident in its kind of critical reception, and its continued appreciation by fans and critics, alike. And R.L. Stein himself has cited it as his favorite Goosebumps episode, and that's a testament to just the kind of faithful adaptation of his storytelling prowess. Um, and then there have been people online that have recognized it as a top Halloween themed TV episode, and just praising its kind of shockingly unsettling imagery and just its ability to deliver genuine frights in a children's horror series. But while some critics, have noted, occasional hokey special effects or stereotypical characters or whatever, um, the overall consensus kind of gravitated towards, its effectiveness as a cautionary tale. Catherine Long's performance as Carly Beth ended up earning her a Gemini Award nomination, underscoring just the quality of, the acting that brought these kind of chilling events to life. Um, and then there was a sequel to this, both book and in the TV series, with Haunted Mass 2. And it just really further solidified, its place in the whole Goosebumps universe, just demonstrating that enduring appeal of, this specific story arc. Um, and just the Haunted Mask is, in my opinion, just a perfect example of Goosebumps at its finest. It's one of the most popular books. The mask and everything, and with the Carly Beth, that is iconic. It's one of the most popular Goosebumps characters. It just masterfully blends that fun, of Halloween with just genuinely unnerving horror, all while delivering this kind of powerful message about self-esteem and, overcoming adversity. Um, and like I said, just the iconic imagery, of the mask itself, and its kind of grotesque features, and it's just its insidious claim over Carly Beth just remains etched, in the minds of many who grew up with the show and with the books. It's a story that doesn't shy away from, the darker aspects of childhood and the pressures that children face, but ultimately offers this kind of cathartic release and just a reminder that true power lies within, you know. So for any fan of Goosebumps or Halloween themed entertainment, the Haunted Mask is not just a must watch. It's just a foundational text in the genre of child friendly frights, especially from the 90s. Just a terrifyingly brilliant tale that just continues to haunt our memories for all the right reasons. So yeah, like I said, some people may not agree with me and count this as a movie, but I 100% do. Even though it was the first episode of the Goosebumps TV series in the 90s, it's still feature length. And I think that definitely counts as a movie. So, I mean, if you say it's not, if you try to tell me it's not, I don't really care. I count it as a movie, so it's counting on this list. But moving on to the last movie we'll be talking about here on the Halloween Hoedown is another favorite from the 90s. And even this was like right before this movie came out, right before I was about to be a teenager. um but this came out in the year 1998, so I had just turned 12 years old. And it's just, for years now, it's just become another staple for me year after year of watching this around this time of year. Because as I've stated many times before, as a lifelong fan of all things spooky and just an admirer of the magic that Halloween brings, I can confidently say that the Halloweentown, and I got my Halloweentown shirt on, um, but Halloweentown holds a special place in my heart for sure. I mean, this was a Disney Channel original movie, um, and it was a foundational pillar uh, at that time for me, and at that time of my life, in the late '90s, as a Halloween movie fan, and it's just a cherished memory that I revisit it year after year. It encapsulates everything that I adore about the season. Um, and just and just the whole spirit of Halloween. And for those who might not be familiar with this cinematic gem, whether you're too young or you're too old, or um, which I don't think anybody's too old for anything. If you want to like it, you like it. It don't matter like what target audience it has. If you like a movie or TV show or whatever it may be, it's you can never be too old for that. But or like I said, but if you were too young or too old, or maybe you weren't even born yet, Halloweentown is this film from 1998 that was just brought to life by the screenplay of Paul Birnbaum, John Cooksey, and Allie Matheson. Um, and it stands as the first film in the beloved Halloweentown series, and it proudly bears that distinction of being only the fourth Disney Channel original movie. So its premiere on October 17th, 1998, marked the beginning of a tradition for countless families and people, myself included. Um, so the film centers on Marnie Piper, who is this spirited, 13-year-old, played by Kimberly Brown, and who on her birthday, which is also Halloween night, discovers a truth that shatters her mundane existence, that she is a witch. So this revelation isn't just a surprise, it's a portal to Halloween Town, which is this vibrant, otherworldly dimension where these creatures of myth and legend, like ghosts and ghouls and witches and werewolves and excuse me, anything you can think of that is monster or Halloween related, they all coexist, freely, intentionally separated from the human world. However, this magical realm is far from peaceful at this time. So Marnie quickly finds herself embroiled in this struggle against these dark forces, this wicked warlock, and insidious curses, and just this cascade of unexpected challenges. So the story begins by introducing us to the Piper family. You have Marnie and her younger siblings, Dylan and Sophie, and their widowed mother Gwen. And Gwen's refusal to let her children celebrate Halloween is just a constant source of frustration for them. And it becomes clear why when her own mother, when Gwen's mother Aggie arrives for her annual Halloween visit. So Aggie is just this powerful and charismatic, witch herself, and she openly encourages just the children's fascination with the holiday, and much to Gwen's dismay. So Gwen, despite being a witch, is fiercely determined to raise her children as mortals. It's a path that she herself chose after marrying a human. So this domestic tension sets the stage for just these fantastical revelations that are to come. Um, so there's this pivotal scene that involves Aggie, reading the children this bedtime story titled Halloweentown, which is just a tale of this mystical place populated by witches and vampires and monsters, all living in harmony with one another. Um, and Marnie's kind of uncanny resemblance to a witch that is actually depicted inside the book, coupled with Aggie's kind of knowing silence, just fuels her, imagination and her growing suspicion that there's more to her family than meets the eye. Um, and just the simmering conflict between Gwen and Aggie kind of comes to a head when Marnie overhears their argument, and Gwen's insistence on this mortal upbringing for her children clashes with Aggie's urgency to train Marnie, as her magical powers will begin to fade without any kind of training by the age of 13. Um, so compounding this kind of personal drama, Aggie reveals this dire prophecy that citizens of Halloweentown are disappearing, and she suspects that there's foul play at hand here. Um, so just driven by this kind of insatiable curiosity, and just a sense of her own destiny, Marnie, with Dylan in tow, secretly follows Aggie as she departs. And they, along with their stowaway little sister Sophie, sneak onto Aggie's magical bus and find themselves transported to the very Halloween town from the bedtime story. So their initial awe at discovering the town's reality soon gives way to this quest to find Aggie. And so they're aided by Benny, who is this wisecracking skeleton taxi driver who ends up taking them to Aggie's mansion. And Aggie, realizing that she can't immediately send them back, agrees to begin Marnie's witch training, but must first confront the bad thing, which is this shadowy figure that's revealed in her cauldron. And it's this harbinger of this kind of impending danger. So she must activate Merlin's talisman, which is this magical artifact with this kind of powerful spell and potion to defeat this evil force and just prevent the descent of darkness upon both worlds. Um, so the journey just to gather ingredients for the potion leads them into the heart of Halloweentown, where they encounter Luke, who is this goblin that's charmingly disguised as a human, who was also a victim of the shadowy creature. So this chance meeting is interrupted by Gwen's arrival. Um, Desperate to retrieve her children and return them to the safety of their mortal home. However, with no immediate bus back, Dylan's suggestion to seek help from the mayor leads to this kind of shocking reunion that the mayor is none other than Calabar, which is Gwen's former ex-boyfriend. And Calabar is, just a seemingly helpful figure, promises assistance, but, kind of harbors a different agenda, if you will. So, meanwhile, Aggie learns from Luke that the demon's ultimate goal is Merlin's talisman, and they are led to this abandoned movie theater where, Aggie confronts this hooded demon and who has just frozen many of Halloweentown citizens that had thought to be disappeared. So Gwen, and her kids, they sense this danger and they follow and witness Aggie's kind of courageous refusal to surrender the talisman. And this act leads to Gwen and Aggie being frozen and just leaving Marnie and Dylan and Sophie to kind of complete the task. So they bravely venture out, collecting all these different vital ingredients like werewolf hair and ghost sweat and vampire fangs to craft this potion, and to help unfreeze their loved ones and people from the citizens of the town of Halloweentown. So their mission kind of escalates as they realize that the talisman must be placed within the town's huge jack-o'-lantern to vanquish this demon. And the climax, unfolds as they reach the jack-o'-lantern, only to be confronted by Calabar, who reveals his true demonic form. So he attempts to enlist the townspeople into his plan to conquer the mortal world. And with Luke's assistance, Marnie bravely scales up on top of the jack-o'-lantern, but Calabar casts a freezing spell to stop her. And in her final moments before succumbing, Marnie manages to drop the talisman into the pumpkin. The talisman ignites, shattering the spell, unfreezing everyone, and weakening Calabar. So the family is reunited, and it's revealed that Calabar's malice stems from Gwen's choice to marry a mortal over him. and he seizes the talisman, vowing to rule both worlds. And in this kind of surprising turn of events, Dylan discovers his own magical abilities, and he joins Gwen and Aggie and Marnie and Sophie in a united front. And together they defeat Calabar, who is vaporized, and Aggie reclaims the talisman. And Luke is restored to his goblin form, receiving this grateful kiss from Marnie. But the film concludes with this kind of heartwarming resolution. Aggie decides to stay in the mortal world to spend more time with her grandchildren, and Gwen and Aggie agree to train Marnie, embracing their magical heritage. The family boards the bus, ready just to embark on a new chapter, filled with magic and togetherness. And the director here, Dwayne Dunham, he really brought a unique perspective to this Disney Channel original movie. While Halloweentown might be one of his most widely recognized directorial efforts, um, Dwayne Dwayne Dunham has this kind of significant background in film editing. His editing work includes films such as Blue Velvet, The Elephant Man, and Ghost. And so he kind of had this keen eye, for pacing and visual storytelling, and rhythm is just it's clear, all throughout Halloweentown. He kind of masterfully balances this kind of whimsical, family friendly, elements with the darker, more suspenseful undertones, and really just kind of creates this story that's both engaging and visually dynamic. And just his ability to kind of establish a distinct atmosphere for Halloweentown, just making it feel both, fantastical and grounded in its own, internal logic, is really a testament to his skill. He successfully translated the charmingly like spooky script into a visually, appealing and emotionally, resonant film. Just really proving his, versatility as a filmmaker. Sorry. I had something in my eye there, so I don't, I don't know what was. Um, but anyway, the legacy of Halloweentown is, in a word, monumental. Especially for those of us, who grew up with it or, discovered it through just kind of these formative years of, of Halloween movie traditions. It transcended its status as a simple, made for television movie to, just become a cultural touchstone. Um, its impact is just deeply felt in several ways. It gave birth to a franchise and, and a whole generation's nostalgia. Halloweentown wasn't just a standalone film. It was just the genesis of a beloved series that spawned 3 sequels. This kind of continuity, allowed fans to grow with the characters and explore more of the magical world. And for a generation, the Halloweentown movies are just inextricably linked to their childhood Halloweens, evoking these kind of powerful feelings of nostalgia and comfort and just that magic of discovery. And that whole distinct aesthetic, and these memorable characters and just that kind of theme of embracing one's true self have really cemented its place, in the hearts of millions of fans. Um, and at a time when, um, when truly family friendly Halloween movies that struck, a balance between spooky and sweet were less than common. Um, Halloweentown provided a perfect blend of those things. It offered just enough fright to be exciting for kids, but was never too terrifying. You know what I mean? Just kind of making it this very safe and enjoyable viewing experience for, the entire family. It normalized the idea of witches and monsters as these characters that were capable of heroism and love, and just really offered a more nuanced and approachable take on these classic Halloween-like characters. Um, and at its core, Halloweentown is a story about Marnie discovering and embracing her true identity as a witch. This kind of theme of self acceptance and just realizing one's potential resonates deeply with a lot of people. Marnie's journey from this curious preteen to a just a brave young witch who saves the day is very inspiring for a lot of kids at that age. And just the film kind of subtly promotes that idea that embracing what makes you different can be your greatest strength. And that's so influential. I feel like that's why I love this movie so much, and it has provided me with so much positivity and confidence over the years. Within myself, especially when it was during a time when I had no confidence in myself. So watching movies like Halloweentown and others that that I've talked about on this channel really helped evolve me as a person over the years. And I think that's it's a very powerful message for any young viewers. Just you have these strong female characters from Aggie's wisdom to Gwen's protective love, and Marnie's kind of burgeoning power. It all contributes to this story that just celebrates that kind of resilience. Um, and that is so influential, I feel. Just and this it has this lasting influence on Halloween aesthetics and culture, just the visual design of Halloween Town itself. The crooked houses, the quirky monsters, the everything about it has become iconic, in my opinion. It influenced that how many people imagined um this magical Halloween world. And just the film's popularity has also contributed to just a resurgence of appreciation for classic Halloween themes and creatures, and inspiring costumes and just decorations and fan art or whatever. It's become this kind of go-to suggestion for Halloween movie marathons, and just this kind of benchmark for Disney Halloween productions. Um, but I guess in conclusion, Halloween Town is more than just a movie. It's like this warm invitation to embrace the magic that Halloween offers. It's a testament to the power of family and just the courage to be yourself, and just that thrill of discovering these hidden worlds. And Debbie Reynolds just delivers a performance that's both comforting and commanding as Aggie. While Kimberly Brown perfectly embodies Marnie's journey of self-discovery. And then you have Judith Hogue as Gwen. um, just the film's enduring appeal kind of lies in its perfect blend, of spooky charm and heartfelt emotion, and just this genuinely engaging story. And I think for any true Halloween enthusiast, um, Halloween Town is not just a watch; it's a tradition. It's a beloved ritual that just continues to cast its spell year after year. Reminding us that the greatest magic often lies in where we least expect it, and in who we are truly meant to be. Um, it's a cinematic treat that like I said, year after year just delivers that kind of spooky sensation that only Halloween can provide. Um, and I absolutely love this movie. As you can see, I mean, I'm a huge fan, and it helped me in a lot of ways, growing up and just watching it year after year, and just influencing me to be myself. And and I've seen that very same thing with a lot of fans that I've spoke with in the past at conventions and people online that are fans of this movie that helped them in that very same way. And I'm so happy to see that this movie, as amazing as it is, has been so influential on a lot of people out there in the world. Um, but guys, I guess that is it for tonight. I want to thank all of you for checking this out, whether it be live or if you're watching this on the replay. Thank you guys so much for just taking time to hear me ramble on about some movies that I love. So I'll be back later this week. Sometimes I'm not sure which day. Um, but it will definitely be sometime this week where I'll be doing a couple more episodes for the Halloween Hoedown here on the 500 movies in 2025. So be sure to check those out when those will be put up, whether it'll be live or if you can watch them beyond the times that I do them live. Please drop me a comment below on what your favorite movie that I talked about for tonight. And so let's have a conversation about these movies. Let's talk more about them and why we love them. And like I said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. It would mean a lot to me, and I thank you so much for that, guys. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button down below to catch more videos from me like this one, and hit that bell for any future notifications. So like I said, I'll have a couple more videos up sometime this week, more Halloween themed movies for the Halloween Hoedown. So be sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss those videos. So you hear me ramble on more about some Halloween movies. But I guess with all that said, guys, I am Crater. This is CraterMania. I love you guys. Have a good night.